I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a look at a gripping novel. It is called Dropped Calls. It's written by one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite authors, a man by the name of Robert McGuiness. This compelling story challenges readers with its thought-provoking exploration of democracy under threat and the call to eternal vigilance. Join us as we uncover the resonant truths within this thrilling work of fiction that feels all too real. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his terrific book. The links are below the interview. Robert, thank you so much for joining me once again here today on Spotlight.
It's wonderful to be here once again. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. This book is terrific. It's a real page turner. It's a novel, of course, but it deals with real life issues as well. Give us a little idea of the inspiration behind Dropped Calls.
Well, to tell you the truth is, they're novelettes, and there's 3 stories in the book. They were all ripped from different thoughts that I had. The first story is 5Gs over Walden Pond. And we look at the Luddites and their tenacity in trying to remove technology from their lives. And I thought there wasn't a better way to express our lack of quiet and space than to go back to Henry David Thoreau and Walden Pond. So I have a young man that leaves his family and friends, and he sets up a homeless camp by Walden Pond. And he's just in search of living a life more simply. And he realizes that it is impossible. He doesn't have a cell phone with him, but the noise from the surrounding areas and the technology, when he goes to sleep at night, he can hear the cars on the freeways, and there's always that constant buzz going on that didn't exist when Thoreau was alive. He lays down, he looks up, a plane goes by, and then he sees satellites, and he curses himself to sleep, thinking that there's no way. Now, even though he doesn't have a cell phone with him, it's the cell phone that interrupts his daily life. And I get a little bit into conspiracy theories about what 5Gs can actually do to a cell or to a living organism, and then larger conspiracy theories. But the underlying story is that we painted ourselves into a corner, we exterminated quiet from our lives, and we have no way to get back to it. Yeah. And that was really the nail that I wanted to hammer home.
Yeah, it was such a simpler time before this. We weren't
Yes.
glued to that all the time. We weren't listening to it, watching it, communicating on it. I mean, it's almost like glued to our heads at this point. I mean, because, so much of our lives are entangled in this machine. I know it replaces probably 1,000 other machines, but
Well, when you get into the conspiracy theories, that's how they categorize them all, because you're taking on big business and you're taking on the ability to produce trillions of dollars. But we found that the 5G networks upset living cells. And it's really interesting because that we found short-term memory is affected. And, and that's already been documented. But what was interesting to me is that they found that longevity has to do with how many breaks in our DNA that we have. And when we have a cell phone that can break the DNA, when we look at long-term memory loss, the thought occurred to me is, what about phylogenetic memory loss? And do we actually lose our common sense? Do we lose our innate fears? Do we lose the purpose and the direction of our lives? And I think those are all real factors. And I don't want to be the conspiracy theorist. I just want to point out is that when, a lot of people say, well, this is part of our evolution, and God must have had a plan for this. But I think we need to take a step back and really reconsider all of those things, and when you talk about evolving and having phylogenetic memories, you're talking about survival strategies that we've gained over millions of years. And
Right.
to throw them away in a 40-year period is just a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just one of the
That's one.
conspiracy.
Let's talk about that one a little bit, then we'll move on to the other stories. So what's the answer, Robert? Can we get this out of our lives? Can we find the peace of Walden? Can we find tranquility? Can we get away from the buzz of the traffic and the
Well,
roar of the
what's really
crowds?
interesting is that they found cell phones, whether they're on or off, is they have the same addictive reward system that drugs have,
Hmm.
which is very dangerous. We're replacing a a neurotransmitter with a calcium, and we're loving it.
Hmm.
So we're going to have to be very strong with our willpower and very um, on in entirety if we want to break those habits. So I don't know if it can be done or not. It's really, especially when the marketing is there. It's a very tough thing to break. So
Yeah. And
I
like you
would
said,
hope
it's kind of addictive also, right?
it's absolutely addictive. And they found is that even when your cell phone is not turned on,
Mhm.
it still puts you in flight mode, which is in psychology one of the main four F's. And in that state, your body makes macromolecules.
Mhm.
So it might make adrenaline or it might make gastric digestive molecules. But when your nutrition goes to these macromolecules, um, it's not going as we photographed out on the axonal ends, the proteins layering that make long-term memory. So we're taking our nutrition and turning it into molecules associated with fight and flight, and
Yeah.
we're not able to learn in that situation, other than the behavior of the addiction that we're feeding. So it's very dangerous on all of those fronts.
Absolutely. And it's not a good state for your body to be in if it's in flight mode. That's for sure.
Yes, and it's no way to be learning. And not only that, but when you make the molecules associated with adrenaline or something like that, and then you don't use it, you not only have to anabolize that, but then you have to catabolize it, and then you have to pass it out of your system. So
Mhm.
we're making these molecules, and then we're not using them, and it's wasting the nutrition that we need to build intelligence and long-term memory. So it's
Robert, let's talk about the second story in your book or another story in your book.
Okay. The second story is ripped from the headlines, and it was a story that I really felt important on a bunch of different levels. And I don't really want to get political, even though I can't help but be political with that story. It's the dream catchers of Lago Amar, and I had a young man from Wisconsin go to a protest, and he ended up shooting a couple of people.
Hmm.
And he got invited down to the resort for the way he handled the revolutionaries. And bearing in mind, Mao had said that every revolution is a just war, every counter revolution is an unjust war.
Hmm.
So when I thought about um, like King George in the American Revolution, he incentivized and monetized the taking of scalps.
Hmm.
And when you think of the king in that, you're thinking that the Americans were in a revolution, which is the natural organic process when they become oppressed.
Hmm.
And then the king was involved in the counter revolution, which was the unjust war. And from that position, we have an egotist who is afferent. All the universal signals go to him. He is the king, you know, he's terrestrial, he's of material and of matter, and he's transitory because the universe doesn't exist like that over the long run. So the turning point in my story was that the scalps were hung in um, the egotist's office, and one of them transmitted the truths of the universe, and he couldn't look at it because it was too much information and it caused him to seize out. And when he engaged with the other one, it was facing the other way, and it was one man's life, and it came at talking speed, and it rolled in nice and slow, and all of a sudden he was having empathy for the revolutionary and actually having a real relationship with this remnant of a human. And it was very important there for me because he went from the egotist with the afferent signaling that was terrestrial and transitory, and he became the altruist that was
Mm.
efferent, and his love spread out through the universe, and he was celestial and he was eternal. And that was the main turning point in the story for me. And I don't use most of those words in that sense, and I don't lay it out like that. But if you read the book and listen to this interview, and you'll see exactly where it turns and the importance of being efferent and being celestial and working towards being that eternal light. So, there's no names are mentioned, but we can know the characters if we're astute and we read the news. So, and to me, that was a fantasy to me, and it was one of that. If I had my way, what would happen? And I thought that this way is everybody heals, everybody grows, and the light shines without being impeded or without being blocked by turbidity.
Yeah. What's your message for readers in that story? What do you hope they take from it?
Well, the whole book is like that. It's things where God gave us choices, and it's funny with a dropped call because it could be dropped on your end, or it could be dropped on my end, or it could be dropped by the server. So when I'm talking about having a relationship with God, there's times that we drop the call. There's times that we don't hear them, but I really want everyone to, and I was saying too, is that it's like the Siddhartha. The more you read it, the more potential you have for enlightenment, and first it's a introduction to it. And then each time you read it, you're a little more into it, not necessarily into the book itself, but your person has changed and you've grown into where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and the light you're struggling to be a part of.
Yeah.
So that's the direction I wanted to move. And I always remember Siddhartha because of that very thing about reading it and knowing more when you read it the second time, and intuitionally you know more and you grow and you don't even realize that you've been growing. But you have, and the same with the cell phones. You read it once and you say that's ridiculous, and then you read it twice and you're thinking, well, maybe can we? And then the third time you think, well, I'm going to put it down a couple of days, and if we all move in that direction, I think there's hope. And I'm not saying to totally do away with cell phones, but I'm saying let's not throw away our phylogenetic memories. Let's not lose our intellect over this. So,
When you talk about phylogenetic memories, what are you talking about? Just explain it for the folks at home.
well, to me is we have 23 pairs of chromosomes and 1.5 billion base pairs, and those things didn't just happen. They came over a long period of time, and each one of those things is, read in threes is a gene, and those codons are instructions, and all those genes, a lot of them we say aren't doing anything. They're silent. And I don't even believe that's true. I believe that we're not using them right now because the environment or whatever doesn't have it. But all those things are learned over many lifetimes of being in a similar situation. And they became a part of us, and all, like the fear of spiders. We should
Right.
know that, and that should be in our genetics, and we should have a reaction to that. And those are the types of things. What foods that we can eat. We might not even know the plant, but we certainly know if it's poison, or we know the taste that tells us that don't eat that. So all those things that God gave us should be encoded in our genetics. And if we don't stray too far and stay within our biologic realm, we should have a plethora of wisdom.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your third story.
The third story is now that one, it was just a conversation I had with myself, and it had to do with spirituality. And I was thinking, just as we were talking about genes and memory and who we are and how we built up, at what point, I believe all of life is sacred. So even the single cell original in the primordial soup was a gift, and the light was turned on. And I kind of approach the question in a roundabout way, like I always do, is when did we get the gene for spirituality?
Hmm.
And when did we first, as a living organism, give thanks to the Almighty for the life that we were gifted?
Hmm.
So this story it's people running around doing people things, but everybody starts starving on the planet. And one boy they think is autistic finally speaks and says that he was told by a bee that the food won't give. And
Hmm.
and he tries to find out about that and found out that an apple tree had told a bee that a species that creates a god in his own image and then turns his back on him shouldn't be enabled.
Hmm.
So the food decides that it's not going to supply any nutrition to people until they change their behaviors. And after many deaths and the herd getting thinned out, the food starts giving again. But it's only when man is no longer at the top of the food chain, believing that he owns the Garden of Eden.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's where that came. And I really thought that each living species should be entitled to its own God and its ability to give thanks in its own way. So I just wanted to touch on that. I really don't know where the story came from, but I was toying with that idea for many years before I actually put it on paper.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating story, as are all of them. What would you say the overarching themes of the book are?
Um, Stay close to your biologic self, and always be helping the living and keep your mind open. And when we get so far removed from it, we don't know right from wrong. When we get so money driven that we make sacrifices, remember how hurtful those sacrifices are,
Mhm.
and how unnecessary they are, and how unproductive they are. Again, like my other book is when you look 2 or 3 generations into the future from here, it's getting a little bit scary, and I think we really do need to have a reset at some point and get back to our fundamentals.
Yeah.
You know, we're still this great species, we're still intelligent, we still have all these abilities, and it would be nice if we used them the right way. And it gets scary to where you go to save the whales, and next thing you know, the whales are in trouble.
Yeah.
You go to save the Amazon, and next thing the Amazon's in trouble. And I
Hmm.
think we really need to practice to stay put and to stay quiet and stop trying to elicit immediate change in our environment like that. Is I don't know how much carbon we use traveling all over complaining about climate change, you know,
Exactly.
but it's not going to get the job done. We're going to have
Right.
to just sit quietly and wait a generation or two.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's possible, but
It's hard to tell what's coming around the corner. Consciousness is a big part of it. So if we're aware of the problem, perhaps we will work together towards a solution, which would be great. How does the idea of eternal vigilance is the price of liberty manifest in the story?
um, well, I think when we're looking at the Dreamcatcher story, um, we're talking about our current politics, and then we go back to where our forefathers came from, and again, we're talking about an egotist versus an altruist. And I think that our forefathers wrote from a very altruistic point of view and a very um, long-sighted vision, you know. And that's kind of what I'm referring to is that um, being aware of that and having that long vision, um, generation after generation. It's hard to get 250 years into a democracy. It's never
Yeah.
happened before. And it's really hard to picture the next 250 years without um, really focusing on it being written by the altruists,
Mhm.
and if we can only have our politics now being manifested by the egotists, we
Mm.
don't have that lifespan. I was thinking one of the things that may be a saving grace for democracy is the fact that minorities and women haven't had their democracy for 250 years. So
Mm.
if they're the ones that rush out to the polls and save democracy, um, that would be a blessing.
Yeah,
You know, So,
absolutely.
anyways, what?
Are you hopeful the book will impact readers' perspectives on democracy?
Um, I think everybody's pretty much set where they are, and I
Yeah.
don't think I have much hope for change there. Um, but like I said, that was a fantasy for me, and
Mm.
I don't know if you read that second story and how it ends there,
Mhm.
but that had the message of us listening to the truth of the universe and the suffering anguish of a single man by hanging the scalps of all our opioid overdoses in all the town squares, one with the hair facing in next to one with the hair facing out. So every American can hear the truth and every American can see the suffering. And, again, it's a fantasy, but that was a solution for one of our problems
Yeah.
and maybe not saving democracy,
Yeah.
you
Don't
know?
you think part of the problem today is that people profit from our divisions? You have Fox on one hand getting rich by, pandering to the right. You have MSNBC on the other hand, pandering to the left and profiting from it. Nobody's really seeking common ground at all.
Well, they found that hate generates 13 times as much money as compassion.
Hmm.
And it really played out to me in the news a couple of years ago when there was like a 6-year-old girl that was missing,
Hmm.
a minority family in middle of California. And the family um, put a reward of $10,000 up to find their missing loved one. And a man got cut off on the access road to the airport, and the woman was on a cell phone that cut him off with the dog on her lap, and he stopped her, grabbed her dog, and threw it over his shoulder. And you can't condone that, but immediately there was $130,000 to find that guy and nail him to a cross. And that was exactly the number that Facebook said that it was 13 to 1 for hate over compassion.
Yeah.
And we were more willing to sacrifice that person for $130,000 than we were concerned about finding a little girl, which is, just it's an abomination to me, but but there we were,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I agree with you. We set it up polarly, and it's so amazing that we are supposed to be intelligent and upright, and we've reduced our entire world to binary systems.
Yeah.
Republican, Democrat, red, blue, yes, no, love, hate. And we are so much more than that. And I really wish that the media could get off of that, and us people could start realizing that we are way deeper. Yeah, I was thinking the other day is how when the Pilgrims landed, is one of the things that they really conquered in the New World, which is, this is probably not a good thing for me to say, but the main thing that dawned on me that was conquered was spirituality.
Yeah.
And we looked at the work ethic, we looked at money being more important than everything else. And then when we get all the way into modern times, supposedly the fluoride in the water calcifies the pineal gland, which is the seat of our spirituality.
Mm.
And now we have all these Christian nationalists and people going to big Billy Graham church revivals and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, what is it like to, or even doing hallucinogenic drugs? You could say it's a spiritual experience, but if you don't have that organ, that mechanism in your body that is for spiritual experiences, you've had a psychedelic experience, you had a revival experience, you had all this good feeling, but you don't have a spiritual experience because you're not capable of it. And thinking about conquering spirituality was such a frightening thought for me,
Mm.
because we share the planet with a lot of people, and to think of them spiritually as void of the ability to have a spiritual experience is very scary,
Yeah.
and I don't know. And it's funny that they came in search of religious freedoms,
Mm.
and that was the end game. Just fascinating,
Yeah.
And I made a point of taking notes on that, and I think that my not next or next one, but the book after that, I'm going to really address that issue.
Okay, well, we are looking forward to that because this is an excellent exploration you've done here with the three stories contained within this novel. The novel is called Dropped Calls. It's written by Robert McGuiness. It is a compelling series of stories that challenge readers with its thought-provoking exploration of democracy under threat and the call to eternal vigilance. It's an amazing book. You will find each one of the stories unique, each one of the stories provocative, and hopefully each one of the stories a call to action to change our country from the path that it is devolving on right now. Robert, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. I really appreciate the time and effort, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Always a pleasure to see you and speak to you, my friend. Thank you so much. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.